Welcome everyone. This is episode 54 of the Transmaxxing podcast, and today's topic is Trutrans versus Trends. So there is this idea that some people have that there are those so-called transgenders, people who transition because it's trendy or whatever. I don't know if that really exists. I think it's more that there is a continuum in terms of how dysphoric people are, what desires they have and all that, but I don't think it is an easy way to separate people into like true trans or trenders. But of course, there are some people who feel very strongly about wanting to be female, but I'm not sure if that necessarily means they're going to have a good transition. It can actually be in the other way sometimes that people who do have a lot of gender dysphoria might transition when it really isn't that great of an idea given their environment. So, Jesse, what is your thought on that?
Yeah, what do you think about like the whole transgenders versus the true trans situation?
Oh, I don't think there is really such anything as true trans. I believe that's propaganda made by people who, whether they openly admit that they oppose trans people or keep quiet about it. Because when I was in high school, I thought that I was transgender, and so I would talk to my friends about it, and this is from personal experience where I get this opinion from, where some friends would say that I'm not actually trans, I'm just looking for sympathy or whatever, or just looking for a reason to stand out. And that really hurt me. It wasn't like they were calling me out or anything, because I am transgender, and years later I'm in the process of transitioning. And when I see people online and they talk about if someone's like truly trans or not, like, as someone who is transgender, watching people say that someone isn't transgender because they don't experience this, it's like, well, I don't experience that one specific thing either, or I experience this other thing. You can't really define what a person needs to have dysphoria wise in order for them to determine their own identity. It's
Yeah,
it's a
that
form
was
of self-expression.
that was definitely a big thing that I liked when I was first came into transmaxing. Is there's definitely this perspective that it's like it didn't really matter what was the reason. It's just like they were here to help everyone with the transition to becoming a woman and becoming beautiful and lovely and yeah, that was the thing that I also I didn't really tell people, but that was the thing that I felt from the experiences of others is there was a difference in like what it truly meant to be trans than what I was experiencing, which is what pushed me away. But I do think that like everyone can come to terms with it differently.
It's
So,
also worth noting that currently what people sometimes mean by them are being really trans is them having gender dysphoria, but that is not the original meaning of truly being trans. The original meaning was being like a girl trapped in a male body, and the later interpretations of that is like the Trutrans cult influencing the conversation in addition to like doctors and psychiatrists and everything, like pushing it in that direction, but that was not the original meaning of truly being trans.
oh yeah, that's where I was going. I feel like that a lot of trans women, a lot of them have like their own specific hangups when it comes to this, which probably stem to like the hurtful things that they were told growing up. And I think that's like a big reason that stems for why a lot of people want to get SRS as a dangerous surgery done on themselves. Because, they feel like they will never truly be a woman without having that.
And
Yeah,
here,
there's. Sorry.
ironically, the people with dysphoria are the ones most at risk because they might pursue dangerous surgeries. They might go to some less than great doctor because they're desperate for SRS. And there are a lot of horror stories because of that. There was a really infamous doctor who will just butcher people. While the people, let's say, you are more on the trender side of it, and you might be more careful with regard to surgeries. You might only have it if you find a good doctor or not have SRS at all. But of course, I'm not necessarily stating that to be certain. It might be that some people with dysphoria, for good reason, still don't have SRS for obvious reason. It's not really a good surgery to begin with. Or their particular dysphoria might not even be in that region.
Yeah, that's why I find it's hard to like put a goalpost of what it means to be true trans, is because like everyone experiences the dysphoria in different ways, and like some are like more intensely in like social situations, as others are more like physically how they look in the mirror. And you can't really like try to make one seem like it's more important than another.
One thing I have noticed is there are certain times where people can respect your identity even if you don't pass, and others can't respect your identity unless you absolutely pass. And that definitely plays a big part into social dysphoria and just physical looks dysphoria. And I notice that I tend to feel more down about the way that I appear when I encounter people who are much less forgiving if I don't pass. And so then I get all sad and I don't feel like presenting myself with how I identify. And that's a big thing with dysphoria, and it sort of makes me feel like when I get all in my head, it makes me feel like I am not actually trans because I don't express that identity. But those are just the thoughts from dealing with that anxiety and that sadness. And then I come to terms with it, and it's like, no, I'm actually trans, whether I go out some days and express it or not express myself on other days because I am sad and dealing with dysphoria.
But obviously, of course, if you cannot pass and you live in a transphobic environment, of course you're going to be uncomfortable with presenting as a female. That is obvious. And also, as you said, with regard to dysphoria, it can manifest itself in different ways. It can be social dysphoria. It can be that you might dislike the way you look. It might be that you prefer female clothing. Some people assume that like all people looking to transition are interested in cross-dressing, for example, but it is not actually the case. Or at least not cross-dressing as a male.
I'd say one of the biggest or bigger downsides for the people who could be considered the transgenders is they may not even like go and like attempt HRT, which may be a bad idea if they really do like the prospects of like appearing as a woman. Yeah, ideally you would want to at least try to figure out if you like the hormone profile of being higher on estrogen before you like have it be over for you looks wise and such.
Yeah, if you don't want to go on HRT, your best option is probably to just present female digitally, so to speak. As we have talked about this before with Transmaxxing, it's worth bringing up again because I think it's an important option. that is
Yeah.
maybe the only viable one for a lot of people.
Yes. Like, there's multiple avenues you could even take with that, where, you could use your own voice and practice that to have something very appealing to men. And you could even exact digital resources from men in game if that's your cup of tea. There's plenty of ways you can have fun with avatar maxing. You could perhaps elaborate on how the true trans narrative is a little damaging on like people transitioning because it can gatekeep others from even attempting to like go through the process because of like people like coaxing them into thinking that they're not actually trans, so they don't even try to get like the help and like the support they need to like start the transition earlier on in life.
Yeah, this is the from a medical perspective where they view being trans as some illness to be cured. But then when we look at actual data, where you look at outcomes and people who regret transitioning, we see that those factors don't actually predict the outcome that much. And we see that social factors are actually more important when it comes to transition outcomes than if you are truly trans or whatever. To the extent we can like measure that in studies to begin with, which is pretty limited because we have to look at old studies done many years ago, and they are also a bit limited.
Another problem that commonly happens because of the true trans narrative is having to go through all like the professional side of things, which can either lead you to like being gate kept by the psychiatrists themselves or being put on dangerously long wait lists and like ruining your opportunity of having a much better life earlier on.
Yeah, you can also make the transition harder as well because you miss out on hip bone growth, for example.
Because of the internet culture nowadays, I think a lot of people have self-induced dysphoria where they see, I mean, it's kind of like where the chasers come into play, where they see, like a very attractive trans girl and they're like, they wish that could be them. So in a way, they kind of like self-induce the dysphoria into them, where maybe they were okay with being, like they it never crossed their mind for 15, 16, 17, 18 years of their life. And then as they get into their late teens, early 20s, they have access to like more like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, stuff like that. Like, maybe less parental controls and they're going to college and they start to see a lot more stuff. And this is probably more typical with like people who grew up in religious and or conservative social settings, kind of like I did. And now they're open to all these new ideas and they see this and they're like, oh shit, that looks interesting. So the way I look at transgenderism is the true medical side, then the too cute side, where it's the trenders, like, oh, I'm just going to be trans and I'm like, whatever, I'm just going to take your tea and, just the trenders, right? And then in the middle, where the middle ground is for me, is the transmaxing side, where it's people who may not everyone had dysphoria, but I think a lot of us here do/did. And it's kind of like the common middle ground. If it wasn't as popular as it was, I know like only 1% of the entire world population identifies as like transgender male, female to male, whatever it may be. I guarantee I know this for a fact. If we didn't have the internet, especially like social media, there would be far less gender people in the world. The rise of social media and stuff like that, you're having all these influencers and stuff like that. Especially on YouTube, there's so many trans influencers, especially the male to female type. Matilda or something like that. And she was from Sweden, and she was a really popular one.
Yeah, so which group do you think is
Okay, there we
doing
go.
better when it comes to outcomes of the transitioning?
I would say the True Med group, the True Scum. Mostly because I think they start earlier than most people. Well, there's a few factors actually. That's the first one. I think a lot of them have the genuine dysphoria as a kid and it's less teenager, and I think they're the ones that are more likely to talk to their parents and or like medical professional to get started on some type of, I don't want to necessarily say puberty blockers, but maybe start on HRT kind of young, like maybe 16, 17, 18, and to really take a full advantage of transitioning. Also, they seem to be the ones that would be more equipped to get the surgeries, like FFS and stuff like that. And with that said, I think it's a really close first and second with Transmaxxing and the True Scum people, just because there isn't much gap in what my perceived age. Like I don't have any like data to back this up. This is just anecdotal evidence what I've seen online over the past decade or so, almost decade, since 2015, since I started looking into this shit, are the no transsexuals, for a lack of a better term. Like they don't want anything to do with masculinity anymore. They seem to do the best.
But I think one problem is that the people with a lot of dysphoria are going to have more mental issues. They are going to more likely face issues with their parents. They might come out and their parents are very transphobic and send them to some like camp or whatever. There are a lot of horror stories like that. They might get thrown out the moment the parents can legally do so, or be very abused. So I think a lot of people with dysphoria are facing a lot of issues. And I'm not sure if them transitioning slightly earlier really makes that worth all the issues they are facing. And also they might transition when doing so is unsafe in countries where doing so is not maybe the best idea. And they might also transition when they cannot pass. They might have repressed because of transphobia for a long time, and then maybe 30, 40, 50 they finally transition. Like for example John 50, for example, like he or now she was probably a true transsexual in a sense. I think on the one hand, being very dysphoric will make you more motivated to transition and do so early and try to pass and everything, because you will have that innate motivation. But it can also create a lot of suffering and stress when transitioning really isn't viable or realistic or a good idea. So it can push people to transition and pass better, but it can also, on the other hand, push people to take big risk and get into trouble, while people more on the trender spectrum will probably not transition if that will result of them having a lot of problems. So they will probably be less likely to transition and find themselves in a lot of trouble because of it. But what we might be overlooking here is that not everyone who is trender or whatever is doing so rationally. They might be convinced that they are transgender or whatever from some YouTube video, and transitioning when doing so really isn't in their best interest because it's trendy. Not really necessarily trendy, but it's like prominent, and they think that I have that too. And this is like a general thing with a lot of like diagnosis with everything. They're going to be people who think they have it when they don't really qualify for it. And they might go to a doctor and the doctor say that, oh, you don't have that issue, then they go to the next doctor instead. So those are maybe the ones who are doing the worst, the ones who think they are like trans, need to transition when they really don't need to do anything. And I'm not sure how common it is, but those are probably the worst outcomes. This marks the end of episode 54 of the Transmaxxing podcast. I hope that you will have a nice day forward, and maybe one day you will also be a transgender representing everyone. Goodbye everyone!